One of the things I remember back in the day was using what was called custom filter anti-aliasing, which I don't remember exactly. I have them sitting around somewhere, but I don't remember exactly what I had. I think it was a 4850, Radeon 4850, and then I got like a 5970 or whatever the fuck it was. But at the time, this was the era that Radeon had the so-called custom filter anti-aliasing. And what I loved about AMD at the time was that, unlike NVIDIA, they could force anti-aliasing in OpenGL programs. Um, the problem with NVIDIA is even if you use NVIDIA Inspector, the super sampling options. This was before they had DSR and all that, in the control panel. Would only work. The super sampling would only work for Direct 3D. I mean, one of the things I'll do when I play Fear, because it is Direct 3D, is I'll run it with 4x4 super sampling on NVIDIA. Okay, well, one of the cool things about those cards is, I could run super sampling Half-Life 2, Doom 3, because remember, it's OpenGL. So, NVIDIA couldn't, but, Radeon could. Soldier of Fortune 2, this, that. But one of the things that was interesting, at least at the time with Radeon, was that it could force super sampling in Fear, even with soft shadows enabled. And I'm not sure why it would disable them, but I don't know. I think it has something to do with just how the stencil buffer is reused. Because they're not exactly soft shadows in the strictest sense. It just takes the stencil buffer and shifts it around by like a single pixel in three other directions and averages them together. Because even though it's an 8-bit buffer, it's either pass fail, right? So it's either fully shadowed or not. But it can still take 256 value grayscale values. But of course, if you've ever tried in Doom, in a Fear or Condemned Criminal Origins, you might have noticed that there's these weird sort of edges around the screen, and then also it can look sort of odd when certain objects. It almost has this kind of glowiness to it or something like that, or I don't know. It extends outside the objects it's supposed to be on. Well, that's why. It's not exactly soft. It's more like it has astigmatism or something. Now, Wolfenstein 2009 is interesting. It uses some kind of fixed kernel, like blur filter, onto the stencil buffer, and I can tell it's a fixed kernel because it doesn't actually like a shadow will look sharper the closer you get to it. So it's not accounting for how far away you are from the shadow. What's interesting about it is Stalker. It doesn't work in the final release, but Stalker was actually supposedly going to have deferred multi-sampling, and really what that ended up being was, kind of modern day FXAA type of stuff. But like before that stuff was really fully kind of created yet. But they were actually using variable width Gaussian kernels. Now there's tech papers on NVIDIA from over 20 years ago about it, but it was never in the final game, or it didn't function. But, the soft shadows, I think that might have something to do with it, but Radeon was able to force it. And, that was a big thing even back then, was the specular aliasing. Even though Toxbig AA and shit like that had been around as long as Doom 3 had been. Probably, I think it's even earlier. But forcing super sampling on those games, oh my god, dude, they look fucking incredible. I used to, force it on Modern Warfare 2. That was the last Modern Warfare I really played other than 3, Modern Warfare 3. But any game from like 2000 to like, 2011-ish, I would force super sampling. And I wish you could still get shit like that on modern cards. NVIDIA has the DSR. I don't like it because you have to run the game in full screen, and I run everything in a window. But it wouldn't take a whole lot to make a 20-plus-year-old game look even better than modern games. I mean, like Shadow of Chernobyl looks infinitely better than Stalker 2 does. And if you use DSR or force super sampling, some like true super sampling on that shit somehow, forget about it. Like I've mentioned with Doom 3, Fear, id Software, Monolith, and like GSC back in the day, and then you can tell all the talent that went from GSC to 4A on Metro 2033. They had phenomenal fucking level designers. I know people back in the day would meme on Metro 2033 with the so-called, 4A face, their physical base renderer, but all the characters, all the, the NPCs look like cartoon characters, this weird, like, unrealistic looking art style. But the level design, to this day impresses the fuck out of me. Like, all the best looking games, in my opinion, have already been made, right? Chaser, Devastation, Daikatana. I know everyone hates that, but whatever. Doom 3, Fear, Condemned, Blood 2, another one people hate, but fuck them. And this and that, Painkiller, Stalker, Shadow, Chernobyl. I don't know. There's so many I could list, but yeah. At the same time, I was using that custom filter anti-aliasing with Radeon cards. They also had the wide tint filtering or narrow tint filtering. That was super sampling, but with a linear reconstruction kernel, which looks infinitely better because every other anti-aliasing, not just multi-sampling, uses a box filter, and that's almost as bad as not having anti-aliasing because a box filter in the spatial domain's a sync function in the frequency domain. So what that means is the reconstruction introduces its own aliasing. And Doom 3, weirdly, it seems to be taken out of Doom, the source port I've been fucking with. But it used to be you could do the screenshot command and you could put a number in up to 256, and it would actually jitter the render, jitter the subpixel position anywhere up to 256 times and then accumulate them into a final image. And literally it was just super sampling with, in samples. And, the thing is with that is you could see on that, like with 256 samples, it still didn't look that anti-aliased, but I'm so, gay and retarded that what I used to do was I would render, you could force super sampling on Doom 3. So I would force super sampling on Doom 3, or like with NVIDIA, you just use the highest level multi-sampling, do the screenshot command with 256x, and then at a larger resolution than my screen resolution, or like also with DSR like NVIDIA. And then that final huge image, I would downscale further with my own custom, offline filtering, and just have this retardedly anti-aliased image. But, I was essentially finding ways to introduce my own filtering because Radeon cards got rid of the cfaa stuff, as far as I'm aware. I don't know why they ever did that, but that shit looked amazing. Holy fuck. It's just so stupid to see like Fear or some game like that that's over 20 years old looking better than fucking modern games. And it wouldn't take much more than that, like the shadow volumes, getting a decent soft shadowing, filter on that. Order into translucency, in my opinion, is a big one. There's multiple ways you could do that. I mean, fuck, even just a few levels of depth peeling would be okay. But I think stochastic translucency would be the best idea. And that's sort of what a lot of games have used for a long time. Like I said, you only see the deleterious effects of it with Unreal Engine 5 because of how much Unreal Engine 5 fucks it up. But using stipple patterns to, get order independent translucency has been a thing that's been used forever. But that and, some sort of mild type of dynamic or at least some like pre-computer radiance transfer type of stuff, I don't know. The days of good level designer, everything's photogrammetry now, and fucking, AI generated, fucking neural network bullshit. And there's just no soul to video games anymore. But because I've been on a trip with, the staircases and bullshit like that recently. First fucking thing I noticed when I was playing Doom 3 is how weirdly OSHA compliant all these fucking handrails and ladders are. They're not fully to spec or whatever. Like, for example, the ladders that have a cage around them in real life would also have a gate in front of them. The cages that they put on them usually don't extend down far enough. I mean, the point of a cage on a service ladder like that is to protect you on the part of the ladder that you're most likely to fall on, which of course is going to be pretty much at the top when you're mounting the ladder, right? Generally at the bottom, there's a low risk of falling. But, I started nerding out about that. And one of the things that I thought would improve Doom 3's engine, other than a few of those really kind of minor things, would be NURBs that were, cubic patches instead of quadratic. And I seen a dude made a video about that not that long ago, about like Adobe Animator or something like that. And I just remember I seen this guy's video and he's sitting here, hashing out why it's not really a circle in the Flash editor or whatever. And it reminds me of all the id Tech 4 or like Quake 3 era games, like where if they have pipes or whatever, and like even the handrails that are done with the Bezier patches, I can tell because of their quadratic characteristics. This is something that used to agonize me, 20 years ago. So I posted some fucking meme comment like that. It was basically, first time, like that fucking bullshit meme. But you can do pretty well enough with the problem with quadratic is being a lower order. You can see this really prominently in Doom 3 and Quake 4. And even in Quake 3 base games where they first added this shit, like Soldier Fortune 2 and shit like that. Anything that makes heavy use of the Bezier patches for curvatures is that they have this weird sort of squared off look on the corners of the pipe or whatever. And pretty much that's a result of, it's essentially a four-sided cylinder, but it's four patches and there's control points to emulate the curve you want, and it's just triangulated at, I think, either at compile time or at runtime or whatever. But it's basically, it's the mathematics of it, but also partly that they could have compensated by using, for example, 8 patches. So making the pipe an octagon and then just, modifying that. I'm not exactly sure what math the displacements in Source Engine use. They're not Bezier patches though, but whenever you subdivide those, they usually make essentially a perfect cylinder, right? Or sphere or whatever you want it to do. So they're probably using the full cubic math, but they're pre-triangulated pretty much. Although, displacements in Source Engine were never that useful in my opinion. But if you've ever fucked with a Doom 3 Radeon or Quake 3 Radeon, the patches in those games are actually really useful. And they're great for making, ladders and handrails and shit like that. And that's something I always notice, how much they went to town with the Bezier patches for all the pipes and handrails all over the fucking place in Doom 3. And I just love every bit of it. But that's something else that's kind of like a nerd fantasy of mine is, a game with, that's going to use Bezier patches using proper cubic Bezier patches. So they at least look correct. And I remember looking at keynotes before the release of Quake 3 where Carmack was talking about curved surface rendering and the issues of nonlinear math. But in my opinion, they probably could have done cubic interpolated polygons but then just use standard linear interpolation for the collision detection.